Good afternoon. Today is another Ageless webinar. I'm here today with Paul Tozour,
Tozer.
and I'm glad I got that name down. Tozour, yes. And Johnny Adams as well. To give a short intro for both of them, Johnny Adams is the leader of the GRG group, and he has made it his mission in life to defeat biological aging. If you want to get in touch with him, you can look at agingintervention.org. And he's very passionate about this, always trying to loop more people in. Definitely suggest reaching out to him. And today, Paul Tozour will be speaking on rejuvenation therapies and several different things that he's done, very high impact strategies that he's done on himself, actually. And Paul has been worked in the gaming industry as a developer for over 25 years. And now he does a lot of different rejuvenation, biohacking type things on himself, and has tried probably hundreds of things, actually. And he's narrowed it down to some things that he's seen results with. And today we want to look through and try to figure out, what can we do to our bodies to be stronger, to be more fit, to enhance our resilience, and to live longer in a healthy state. That is the key. That's what we want to learn more about. And so today, that's what we'll be going through. So thank you, Paul. And
cool.
Really
All right. Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen here. And okay, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Great. So what I want to talk about today is high impact rejuvenation strategies, right? I could talk for hours and hours about all the supplements I take, sleep optimization, fitness, diet. All those things are super, super important. But what I want to do today is just focus on the high impact interventions that I've discovered that you probably are not going to hear about elsewhere. Things that have made a real difference, focusing on things that either greatly impact epigenetic age by more than 4 years or have the potential, believably, to greatly extend lifespan, that is by more than 20%. So that's what I'm calling high impact. The 4 things I want to focus on specifically today: therapeutic plasma exchange, the combination of Rapamycin Acarbose, a drug called Mounjaro, also known as Tizapetide, and Telomerase gene therapy. Therapeutic plasma exchange, I've seen massive epigenetic age reduction from that and hugely reduced uric acid levels. I'll be going into that. Rapamycin Acarbose lowered my glucose quite a bit, helped with weight loss. There's some interesting stuff on mTORC1 inhibition and mTORC2 activation in there. Mounjaro, I've seen massive weight loss from that, as well as massive visceral fat reduction and glucose reduction. And telomerase gene therapy, well, it worked. I've got longer telomeres thanks to that, and I'll be showing you the proof. Some quick disclaimers before I start. Informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this presentation is medical advice. I'm not a researcher, and I have no medical training. So take all of this with a grain of salt, do your own research, and consult your primary care physician before undergoing any treatments or therapies. Okay, so therapeutic plasma exchange. Essentially, therapeutic plasma exchange, I'll skip to the next slide for a moment. What they do is they put needles in both your arms, they draw out your blood from one arm, and then they remove 70% of your plasma, and then they combine what's left with a combination of albumin and human albumin and saline solution. And they also put all of your red and white blood cells and your platelets back in. And I got this done at Maxwell Clinic in Brentwood, Tennessee, just south of Nashville. I had 2 sessions in middle of October, one on a Tuesday and another one 48 hours later. Had that same thing done again in January. And it takes about 2 to 3 hours. So Dr. Irina Conboy has done some amazing research with this. Both Conboys have. Dr. Dobry Kiprov has also done some great research on this, but I want to especially focus on Dr. Conboy's work. She's found that it lowers the levels of more than 72 age-associated proteins. So these are proteins that naturally accumulate in your body as you age. A lot of them are inflammatory, and some of them, essentially gum up the works. They inhibit your body's own rejuvenation response, especially TLR4. There are a whole bunch of mechanisms by which TLR4, essentially stops a lot of rejuvenation at the cellular level. And by getting rid of those age-associated proteins, you end up with a more youthful protein profile. I'll be going into that a little bit more later. It reduces your epigenetic age. We don't have a really good, accurate estimate of biological age, but most people would agree, most researchers I think would agree, that epigenetic clocks are the closest thing we have to a real estimate of biological age. And out of all the epigenetic clocks available, True Diagnostic, I think, is generally considered the gold standard. So Maxwell Clinic, well, when I visited their clinic, they said they typically see 5 or 6 years of epigenetic age reduction at the 2-month point after they do the first pair of therapeutic plasma exchange treatments. So that's tremendous. And I did see that, as well as some other stuff that I'll be going into. Because you're getting rid of so much plasma, it also lowers your iron levels, it reduces your germ load. So any viruses and bacteria and whatever else are in the bloodstream, 70% of your blood, your plasma gets eliminated with each session, so a lot of those get reduced. It improves immune function, another very interesting result of the Conboy paper. There is one downside: it does remove antibodies. So for example, if you had something like COVID-19 in the past and you've built up natural immunity, well, you're getting rid of a lot of those antibodies when you do therapeutic plasma exchange. So if that's something you're worried about, that might be a red flag for you. Now, this chart on the right is fascinating. Dr. Conboy, in her paper, she essentially put together a protein-based aging clock that took those 72 age-associated proteins that I mentioned, did a bunch of math on them, and essentially was able to correlate, estimate biological age based on people's chronological age. So the yellow dots that you see on top are the participants before their therapeutic plasma exchange sessions began. And after 5 or so treatments of therapeutic plasma exchange, those same dots are now the purple dots that are much lower. So you can see here somebody who is about 75 years old on the far left, that person's age, according to this proteomic clock, was around 20 or 18. So you see massively reduced biological age according to this proteomic clock, and almost everybody is under the age of 20 except for one person who's about 30, but that's still pretty tremendous. So for me, here are the results that I experienced with my epigenetic age. Just before they took a True Diagnostic epigenetic age test, my intrinsic age, according to True Diagnostic, just before the very first treatment was 64.3. My actual chronological age is 50. Now, 9 days after treatment, it dropped to 55.3. That's 9 years of epigenetic age reversal in 9 days. At the 2-month point, it was 5.21 years of epigenetic age reversal, saying I was 59.1 years. And then at 3 months afterwards, it said I was 57.71, which is 6.6 years of epigenetic age reversal. I don't have any other results yet from after the therapeutic plasma exchange was done. These vertical purple bars that you see are when the plasma exchange treatments were actually done, but I'm very excited to see if subsequent therapeutic plasma exchange sessions are going to get these numbers even lower. Obviously, I would love to get it below my chronological age. Now, it is, of course, a little worrisome that my epigenetic age was so high before I began. And I can tell you, quite frankly, why that is. It's because I didn't get into biohacking really at all until the age of 44, 45 or so. And so I had more than 2 decades of, work in the video game industry, poor diet. I, didn't work out every day. Sometimes I only worked out 2 or 3 days a week. And so the accumulation of all of that and the accumulated stress and the fact that I only got into biohacking maybe 7 or 8 years ago meant that my epigenetic age was quite high, quite a bit higher than my biological age. So I was going into this certainly not as healthy as I could have been. And I also had too much visceral fat and too much subcutaneous fat, and I'll get into a little more of that later. So one thing I want to talk about in the context of therapeutic plasma exchange is uric acid. Dr. David Perlmutter, I highly recommend this book. Drop Acid talks about how uric acid is actually critical to metabolic health. And he makes that case very, very convincingly in this book. I consider it to be a fact at this point. It's uric acid is about much, much more than gout. It's about type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's and much, much more, and obesity. And he recommends some strategies in this book to lower your uric acid levels. For about a year, I tried pretty much all of the strategies recommended in this book. They didn't work for me, but what did work was therapeutic plasma exchange. So take a look at this chart. The blue line is my uric acid levels. Once again, the purple vertical lines are when I did the 4 therapeutic plasma exchange sessions that I've done so far. You can see that my most recent uric acid blood test before my first therapeutic plasma exchange session, that blood test was taken in like late June of last year, was 7.5, which is dangerously high. Now the green is the recommended range that you'll get from Quest or LabCorp or whoever does your testing, but realistically, the orange horizontal line of 5 is the place where you really start to see negative consequences from your uric acid levels being too high. And so you really want to get uric acid as low as possible, and you should not read too much into the range that you get from whoever's doing your blood testing. So anyway, after my very first set of therapeutic plasma exchange sessions, my uric acid dropped to 2.2, and then it stayed in that range ever since. It was 2.4 in late January, and then in March, it was once again 2.2. So my uric acid problem is magically fixed. So that's pretty awesome. Next thing I want to talk about is Rapamycin Acarbose. These are both drugs. These are 2 of the most powerful life extension modalities, at least as far as mice are concerned. They seem to have similar effects in humans, but much more work is needed. The interventions testing program tests several different modalities a year on mice to see if they actually extend mouse lifespan. Rapamycin increases mouse lifespan alone by 23 to 26%, Acarbose by 17%, and when you combine them, you get a 29% increase. That is a major, major increase. And so why does that work, and why do they have this synergistic effect? So what it comes down to is something called mTOR, right? mTOR is actually named after rapamycin. Which is kind of funny. The R in mTOR stands for rapamycin, and there are 2 parts of the mTOR complex, mTOR1 and mTOR2, and they have very different effects. Not going to go into all the chemistry here, but the bottom line is that temporary suppression of the mTOR1 complex is associated with longevity, and that's what rapamycin does. A lot of anti-aging longevity biohackers will take rapamycin once a week or once every 2 weeks, whereas Acarbose stimulates mTOR2, and mTOR2, activating mTOR2 is also associated with longevity. So it's this funny thing where you take rapamycin, it's going to suppress both of them, but especially mTOR1, but then Acarbose is going to counterbalance any effect that rapamycin would have had on suppressing mTOR2 and actually activate mTOR2. So now Acarbose specifically, I think people don't talk about this enough because it's a fantastic little drug. People talk about metformin all the time, but I'm much more excited personally about Acarbose. It prevents the breakdown of starch into sugar. It lowers your overall glucose level. It especially reduces dangerous glucose spikes. So a lot of biohackers will take Acarbose just before a meal, and they'll get much lower glucose spikes as a result of that. This graph you see on the right, this is done in rats, but you see rats that were on 5 milligrams of Acarbose had much lower glucose spikes after a meal. It also increases levels of GLP-1. I'm going to be talking about Mounjaro in a minute. Mounjaro is also a GLP-1 activator, but bottom line is that really helps with weight loss. It's also anti-inflammatory. It inhibits nuclear factor kappa beta and reduces levels of interleukin 6, curbs adipose tissue inflammation, and also even remodels the gut microbiome to some extent. So it's pretty amazing stuff. I started off with just taking 25 milligrams of Acarbose back in like September, October, gradually increased it to 50 milligrams. Then I read about Brian Johnson, the biohacker who is spending $2 million a year on longevity. He takes 13 milligrams of rapamycin once every 2 weeks and 400 milligrams of Acarbose a day, 200 milligrams each with breakfast and dinner. So I essentially at this point, I'm such a believer in both of these things that I've adopted his regimen, and that's at least for the last 2 weeks or so. That's what I am now doing. So Mounjaro is the brand name for Tizapetide. Tizapetide. This is sort of similar to Ozempic, which is a very popular weight loss and type 2 diabetes drug, but Mounjaro is even more powerful. So I've been prescribed it off-label just for weight loss. Mounjaro is a GLP-1 and GIP agonist. It documented weight loss in a fairly large cohort of participants of 8.6 to 12.8% of body mass at 52 weeks, and a documented reduction in A1C levels of 2.2 to 2.55%. So both of those are very good things, and I'm going to be sharing my results with Mounjaro in a moment. Be aware that anywhere between 40 and 50% of the weight that's lost is going to be lean mass, and that's not a good thing at all. You really don't want to be losing muscle. So you have to think about that. Do I have enough lean mass? How do I minimize the potential for losing my muscle when I'm on Mounjaro? The effects are not permanent. If you stop taking it, you'll gain the weight right back within 6 months to a year. Was listening to a podcast with Dr. Peter Attia, I think it's peterattiamd.com. He mentioned that everyone he's seen who's on Mounjaro has experienced an increase in heart rate. I didn't experience that. I'll show you my heart rate graph in a minute. Also, mice taking Mounjaro do sometimes get thyroid cancer, but there are some differences between the biology of humans and mice that lead us to believe that this is much less likely in humans. So far, thyroid cancer in humans taking Mounjaro is extremely rare, although if you do have a thyroid condition, there are some counterindications. So anyway, there's a link at the bottom. I recommend checking that out if that's something you are concerned about. So here are the results of some clinical trials of Mounjaro. You can see that the 3 different levels of blue in this graph are 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, and 15 milligrams of Mounjaro once a week. And you can see that the deep blue, the one that saw the biggest reduction, went from around 90 kilograms to just under 80 kilograms. So that's more than a 10%. Oh yeah, it's a 12.8% weight loss. So that's pretty impressive stuff. Here's my heart rate graph since October 10th of last year. According to my Oura ring, I wear an Oura ring on my finger every night to track my sleep numbers. So my heart rate since I started taking Mounjaro, the vertical purple line, has not increased at all. In fact, it's gone down a little bit. So maybe Peter Attia is experiencing this with his clients, but I have not seen it whatsoever. Now, here is my actual results in terms of weight loss and glucose with Mounjaro. Take a look at the orange dots. You'll see this steep vertical decline in the trend line. Let me see if I can move. There we go. I can move that. I was about a little over 215 pounds when I started. Actually, 218 pounds when I started on Mounjaro. After I began, I got down to basically 193 pounds in the course of 3.5 months. So I lost around 26 pounds or so. About half of that was lean mass, unfortunately. I've done a DEXA scan about once every 6 weeks. So a lot of lean mass lost. And once I bottom out and stop losing weight, I'm going to have to focus on putting all that muscle back. I have lost a certain amount of strength on some of my exercises as well, which is very unfortunate. So that's something to be aware of. Now the blue dots are my glucose levels. You can see on the left side of the chart, they're bouncing around between like 91 and 95, but the average is about 92.5. Now the optimal in terms of all-cause mortality is around 85. When we're young, teenagers, glucose, and by the way, this is glucose tested first thing in the morning with a finger stick. I tried a continuous glucose monitor at one point. I think it's great technology. I love it. I endorse it. But because I do sauna several times a week, I find that the continuous glucose monitors actually melt and malfunction. So I'm not able to use them because of the temperatures that I expose myself to. Anyway, this is a finger stick glucose test first thing in the morning. My glucose went from an average of 92.5 to around 84. So that's fantastic. And one reading a couple days ago was even as low as 70. So that's pretty amazing. And there's sort of a U-shaped curve for glucose. You certainly don't want it to be too low, but the lowest all-cause mortality is right around 85, and this does tend to rise steadily as we get older. So now here's something very interesting. Visceral fat, of course, the fat that is surrounding your tissues, surrounding your organs like the heart and the lungs and so on, that is much more dangerous and causes much more inflammation as we get older than the subcutaneous fat that's sitting just under the skin. Now, on the 15th of December, just a few weeks after I'd started the Manjaro, I had 3.37 pounds of fat mass, and it was 98.87 cubic inches. When I got it tested again at the end of February, it was 1.53 pounds and 44.76 cubic inches. So both in terms of pounds of fat mass lost and in terms of volume, I cut my visceral adipose tissue in half, and I believe that is primarily due to the Mounjaro. So that is awesome stuff. I never expected I'd ever be able to lose that amount of visceral fat, but that kind of makes up for losing all the muscle. So I'm very, very happy about that.
I feel compelled to interrupt now, Paul.
Yeah.
And I to my limited mind, that lean mass loss is a big red flag and serious, and I would do you an injustice if I didn't speak up now. It's very difficult to put it back on, and it's not just muscle. It is, of course, organ. The too few times do we hear about the connecting or the interstitial tissue that holds us together, and that's very important in the management of what's going on in our body. Not to let, I mean, you sound very, very sharp and alert today, but it's also our brain. And also, I would have a concern, since you mentioned lean mass, of gut thickness and integrity. It would be interesting to have a test of gut leakage.
Yes.
So for those reasons, I personally would not, now that I so much appreciate hearing what you've had to say, I'd never take the stuff.
Understood. Understood.
There are ways to, and I don't know how much lean mass I'm losing on just eating a lot less and partial day fasting. I suggest, since I do it, to lose about 1 pound a week, very little. But and also there's a method to it to make it almost a game or a contest, to feel a little bit hungry, a little bit of a hunger edge throughout the day.
Yeah.
And then you don't eat after about 6 or so, and partial day fast from 2. So I just felt compelled to stick my nose in and
you're absolutely right. Losing lean mass is potentially very dangerous, especially for people who don't have much lean mass to lose in the first place. For me, I feel it is worth the risk in my particular case, because I did have actually quite a bit of muscle, but also quite a bit of fat. So I had a lot of both to lose. And the way I'm seeing this is, it's, when you're a weightlifter, you think in terms of bulking and cutting cycles. I was reasonably good at the bulking cycle, the cutting cycle, not so much. So this is finally getting me to that cutting cycle, but I absolutely expect maybe I'll lose another 10 pounds with Mounjaro at most, and then I'm going to switch back to a bulking cycle, and I'm going to be doing everything I can think of to improve my body composition and putting the lean mass back on. Because yes, losing 1 pound of fat and 1 pound of muscle at the same time, that almost evens out, because having lean mass is so important as we age. Like my friend Carl Lenore, the podcaster on Superhuman Radio, likes to say, muscle saves lives. And it is incredibly important to do everything we can to do resistance training, lift weights, and preserve our lean mass as we age. So bottom line, you're completely right. And so this is a critical trade-off that people need to be aware of. And you don't want to just do this as, oh, you know, it is sort of a magic pill. But it's a magic pill that has this potential negative consequence that could be very deleterious for our aging if we're not careful about it. And I'm very much planning, you know, in May, June, July, whenever, as soon as I bottom out with Mounjaro, to start a bulking process, reduce my Mounjaro levels to maybe half of what I'm taking, and focus on putting the weight back on as muscle mass.
Thank you. I really appreciate your intelligent approach. Everything we do, it's a very carefully calculated risk. One fact we know that I believe is aging is 100% fatal, but on just reducing eating and kind of making a game out of it and enjoyable, you know, you, Jason, anyone, feel free to contact me and I'll tell you how I do it. I'll shut up now. Thank you.
No, absolutely. I was just going to say a quick comment on the discussion. I think you both brought up really good points, and it really exemplifies sort of the case by case, protocol by protocol, personalized approach that people have to take. You know, where one thing like for one person, say that person is 110 pounds, like they probably would not want to take this, but for someone, you know, who's over 200 pounds, like it might make sense. And I think it really depends on the person. And to your both your points, I feel like if you're able to maintain your strength, like if you know, like, okay, I can lift X number of pounds, Y number of times, and you notice like that going down, I mean, maybe at that point you're like, okay, do I decrease how much I'm taking? Because obviously everything's going to have a trade-off, and I guess with this particular therapeutic, the you know, everyone has to do that equation in their mind. And I feel like for you, Paul, I mean, you're probably pretty confident that you haven't lost that much strength, or you probably would stop taking it, you know?
Right,
So probably like,
right,
I've lost
absolutely.
a little strength, but you know, you can put that strength back on.
Yeah. And honestly, you know, I've been working out like a maniac for at least the last 10 years. And so I have enough strength that, oh, if I backtrack by 5%, that's no big deal. I know I can make that 5% back. So.
Oh, absolutely. Quick question on the other one too, on the rapamycin and Acarbose. How do you say it?
Acarbose.
Acarbose. On Acarbose. So when you increased your dosage, did you feel physically different? Like, did you notice it? Like, was it a noticeable, like, oh, I doubled my, or I quadrupled or whatever? Did you have a physiological response that was
yeah, with Acarbose, certainly I do notice things. I notice less hunger overall. That could be the fact that it increases GLP-1 the same as Mounjaro does. You know, so you get some suppression of appetite there. But also I would notice, the main things I would notice would be like, I could have a fairly large meal the night before and still feel in the morning like, oh, you know, I don't feel overfed. You know, one of the great things about Acarbose is it essentially blocks a lot of the carbohydrates. So I had a ton of rice with my fiance, cooked an amazing meal last night, you know, salmon with carrots and rice. And I had a ton of the rice. But then when I woke up this morning, my glucose was nice and low, and I just didn't feel the way I normally would after eating all that rice, because normally it really affects me.
Interesting. Do you feel that, I know there could be like a trade-off similar to the other compound and even metformin. I mean, could there be a decrease in strength and muscle from Acarbose and as well?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. I'm certainly not aware of any studies to that effect.
Okay.
Yep. And in fact, with rapamycin, you know, what I have seen, I can't recall the specific study, but what I've seen is that, you know, temporary suppression of the mTOR1 complex by dosing it once a week actually helps preserve muscle.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. You don't want to be taking rapamycin every day, right? It can actually suppress your immune system, you know, if you take a high dose every day. But if you take a certain dose once a week or something like that, or once every 2 weeks, you know, it should actually help preserve your muscle mass.
Is there any way to determine a personalized approach for rapamycin, not unlike in terms of the dosage, but like this group of people should not take rapamycin, this group should, or have we not really been able to differentiate between those yet?
I'm not really sure. You know, it's a hard thing to actually measure in terms of how does your body actually respond, right? Because what biomarkers do you look at? We don't really have a good biomarker for like, what is your mTOR activation level? How much circulating rapamycin do you have in your bloodstream? So
Gotcha. Okay.
and what we have right now is a lot of biohackers trying a lot of different doses. And I eventually, again, ended up just copying Brian Johnson's routine because A, the guy clearly knows what he's doing and has put a lot of research into it and tracks the data like a maniac. And B, everything I'm reading about what he's doing with these two, it all checks out.
Nice.
Where do you get your rapamycin, Paul?
There's a company called Healthspan, gethealthspan.com. And they can prescribe both of these.
Okay.
Nice. Thanks, Paul.
So
Yeah.
then you get it from a U.S. pharmacy, Sirolimus?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. They send me both of those. So last thing I want to talk about is gene therapy. As some of your viewers may be aware, your chromosomes have these little caps on the ends. They're just these very simple repeating DNA strands called telomeres. They're like little shoelace caps. And as we get older, these telomeres get shorter and shorter and shorter. And once they get to a certain critical level, a whole litany of bad things can happen. The cells can die, they can become senescent, in which case they actually become harmful to the body. There are a bunch of tests that you can take, blood tests that will tell you the length of your telomeres and estimate your age based on that. It's not very accurate. It's not nearly as accurate as something like the True Diagnostic Intrinsic Age Epigenetic Test, but it's interesting information. Now, why are telomeres so important? There are certainly some researchers in the longevity field who think, oh, telomeres aren't important. That was all disproved. But the fact of the matter is they are critically important. The slide that you see here is from Bill Andrews' talk at RADFest 2022 last year. And he makes the case very, very concisely that because of telomeres, because all of your cells have telomeres, and every time your cells divide, these telomeres get shorter by one base. That means your cells can only divide 50 times, and our lifespan is limited to 125 years. And it changes your gene expression patterns, and our younger cells behave like older cells. So telomeres, if you're 30 years old, telomeres are probably not a big issue for you. But if you're at 80 or 90 years old, they're probably a big part of what's going on deep down inside that's causing some of the aging that you're experiencing. No human has ever been documented to live past, I think, 122 or so. And this is the reason why. It's because of your telomeres. So unless we do something about telomeres, you know, we do not really have any hope of living past 125. You know, this is factual, right? And certainly there are a million other things that are important in longevity. There, you know, there are mitochondria, there are proteins. You know, telomeres are far from the only thing, but they are critical to getting past that 125-year barrier. So here is actually, I'll do this slide. Here's a very interesting experiment. I believe Liz Parrish was involved in this, but essentially they gave mice treatment of telomerase. Telomerase is an enzyme that extends the length of those telomeres and just keeps adding more bases to the ends. And the group that had the telomeres lived 40%, the telomerase gene therapy lived 41% longer. And that's an absolutely extraordinary result. So you can see here the black line in the middle, those mice died around 29 months, I think this is months. And then the ones with the telomerase gene therapy died at around 41, 42 months, which is the equivalent in a human of about 115, 120 years. So that's pretty incredible stuff. So if it works anything in humans like it does in mice, then people who have gotten this therapy might have a chance to live past 120. Liz Parrish is the first human to have gotten this therapy. She got it 10 years ago, and she has seen radical and continuous telomere growth over the last 10 years. Here's a graph she showed at RadFest in October of last year that just shows her telomere length. And the blue bars are the length of her telomeres initially when she started this 10 years ago. And the orange that you see on top is the additional telomere length according to the blood tests that she's had taken. And so each bar is separated by about 2 years. And this does not happen. If you really understand telomeres, no human on Earth should ever experience this. So this is proof that a miracle has occurred here and that this gene therapy does actually work. This is absolutely extraordinary. Telomeres in almost everybody, no matter what supplements you take, no matter how much you meditate, you can make them shorten more slowly, but you generally cannot make them longer, especially not over this to this extent over this long a time period. So this is really incredible stuff. Now, I got my telomeres tested in August 2019 and again in February 2021. And I found something terrifying. I found that my telomeres were way too short. So you see this these colors here, the red and orange and yellow and green and blue, these are the different percentiles of the population. So the red is the bottom 5 to 10% of the population. And my telomeres were so short, I was actually below the red band. So for my age group, I had ridiculously short telomeres. And I think that was a combination of all the stress that I'd been in the video game industry in my 20s and 30s and early 40s, as well as bad diet, lack of exercise, not meditating enough, things like that. So that scared the hell out of me. So I went and got the same human telomerase reverse transcriptase gene therapy that Liz Parrish got. And based on 2 subsequent telomere tests from 2 different vendors, I was able to demonstrate that my telomeres are rapidly regrowing. I went from the bottom 1% of the population for my age group to the bottom 35 or 40% over the course of about a year and a half. So the human telomerase reverse transcriptase therapy absolutely provably worked. So bottom line, what I'm doing seems to be working. So I want to cap this off by talking a little bit about the hallmarks of aging. There's the whole concept of the 9 different hallmarks of aging. And I want to talk about how some of the therapies that I talked about today actually impact those hallmarks of aging. Now, the different things that I'm doing, I'm doing exercise, sauna, red light therapy, sleep optimization, peptides, a million other things. Those are also, I'm sure, affecting these hallmarks of aging. But I want to talk about just how these particular therapies are affecting those hallmarks, just to tie this in. So we've got things like genomic instability, telomere attrition, epigenetic alterations, and so on. Now, the hTRT gene therapy, of course, that addresses telomere attrition because a very large percentage of my cells, essentially now have what's almost an extra chromosome inside them. They have this little strand of DNA that's continuously being replicated, producing telomerase. Then that telomerase goes around to all the other chromosomes and extends them. So that's being addressed. Genomic instability is partly being addressed. I believe Liz Parrish has found that this telomerase therapy actually preserves the integrity of the chromosome to a large extent, because the telomeres at the ends do a lot of work to essentially protect the chromosomes from damage. It also somewhat impacts stem cell exhaustion, because stem cells, part of the reason they get exhausted is they have telomeres too. And those telomeres get exhausted, so now they have longer telomeres. And so it's likely that we're going to see longer lived stem cells as a result of this sort of therapy. Therapeutic plasma exchange especially addresses loss of proteostasis, because it is replacing a huge proportion of the proteins in your bloodstream, especially the damaged proteins that are malfunctioning, as well as the age-associated proteins that are inflammatory or otherwise gum up the works, and allowing those to be replaced with healthier proteins, and overall improving your proteomic profile. Also improving, we saw that there was a reduction in epigenetic age, so it is making important epigenetic alterations there over the long run, and also helps with deregulated nutrient sensing, and altered intracellular communication. Finally, Rapamycin Acarbose and Manjaro also are going to, impact deregulated nutrient sensing by improving insulin sensitivity, reducing glucose, and so on, as well as altering intracellular communication. So at least 6 out of the 9 hallmarks of aging should be impacted by the 4 therapies that I've talked about today.
Amazing. Really appreciate
Yes.
that, Paul. Yeah, definitely well put together. And yeah, a few questions or comments. Maybe we can kind of talk a little bit through these. So starting on maybe the hTRT gene therapy. So the actual experience, that was just you have a bag of liquid, it just went into your blood, didn't take very long.
Yep, that's exactly right. It was just like getting an IV drip at your local clinic. Took 20 minutes.
Okay,
and so inside that IV bag were a couple of million or a couple of billion viruses. I think at the time they were using adeno-associated viruses. I think they've switched to CMVs now. Liz Parrish can tell you a lot more about that than I can, of course. But anyway, these viruses that cannot replicate, but they just carry this genetic payload that then goes around to your various cells and inserts that payload into the nucleus.
Gotcha.
And that payload is DNA instructions for telomerase.
And those instructions would upregulate the protein production of telomerase to then activate your telomeres, extend your telomeres through that protein.
Correct.
Interesting.
Correct.
Makes me think, okay, so really it's any way to extend those, maybe there's this potential benefit to break that barrier of 125 years. And it seems like, from what I've heard, there's other benefits too. I mean, just having longer and stronger telomeres, you may have less mutations potentially, or less genomic drift or changes in the, I guess,
Yes.
epigenetic alterations, right?
Yes, because longer telomeres are highly protective. They help protect the chromosome.
Okay. And yeah, so that is an interesting one. I know that one is being expanded by many researchers and practitioners around the world, actually. And it seems like that one, along with a few other gene therapies, are very promising. We definitely got our eyes and continue looking at how that pans out. And I've even heard, thinking about Liz Parrish, her telomere is getting longer over time. They're just testing her blood though, not like here's a sample of your, kidney or something, right?
Right. Now, apparently some studies have found that they test the length of the telomeres. I believe it's from the red blood cells, but some testing has found that the telomere length in blood cells is a very good indicator of the telomere length of all the other cells in your body.
How would they know that though without taking a biopsy?
I believe for those studies, they did actually take biopsies.
Oh, they did? Oh,
I think. Haven't read the papers, but that's what I've heard.
Okay. Circling on to oh, go ahead.
Oh,
you're good.
No, I cut you off. I'll wait. You say when, Jason.
Oh, well, actually, I was going to swap over to TPE, but if you have another comment on the gene therapy.
Yeah. Well, what telomere test do you use? Do you happen to know which one Liz uses?
Yeah, Liz, well, the ones they had me use when I got my gene therapy done by Integrated Health Systems was life length TAT, but I've also had it done by, let's see, hang on 1 second. I'm just going to find it here. SpectraCell.
Okay.
Yeah, SpectraCell is the other one. And I've had a few others done as well. So yeah. I've had a few others done like telomeres and stuff like that, telomere science systems. So
yeah, I've used all 3 you've mentioned, but what I've come to rely on SpectraCell. But what do you think of it?
Yeah. I think SpectraCell and Lifeline TAT are both very good. So not sure I have a favorite.
Interesting. No, yeah, this is gene therapy it's very disruptive. We're still at the beginning. I think that this is really good. The fact that you can measure these things too, I think is phenomenal. And I think that I think your telomeres will probably keep getting longer. And
Yeah.
I mean, even if you get this again too. So
Yeah, I've got just a couple minutes left before I have to run.
okay.
You know, we were talking earlier about the slide that I deleted from this presentation. As long as we're on the subject of gene therapy,
Sure.
I was a participant in plasmid therapy. In October of this year. I left out the slide just because I didn't see any results from it. So it didn't really fit into the topic of high impact strategies. But essentially, it's a company called MiniCircle. It's based here in Austin. But they insert these little circles of DNA called plasmids, you know, essentially put a couple million or a couple billion of them into your fat cells, and they just sit there and they keep on producing whatever protein they encode. And then that protein ends up making its way out into your bloodstream. Now, MiniCircle's plasmid therapy, it's temporary. It only lasts about 18 months. And it's also reversible. So if you have any safety issues, if you have any side effects from whatever they're giving you, it's you can just take tetracycline or doxycycline, and that will destroy the plasmids. So it's really cool stuff. Now, I was part of a follistatin cohort number 2. So the DNA that I got inserted in these plasmids essentially was supposed to encode for follistatin 344, which is supposed to block the myostatin in your muscles that prevents hypertrophy, right? That keeps your muscles from getting too big, stops your body from spending too much on muscle growth. Now, the theory is if you inject, you know, this sort of therapy. Now, you can't just inject follistatin itself because it has a super short half-life, but if you inject follistatin plasmids, those are going to continuously produce follistatin. So your blood levels of follistatin are going to be continuously high, and then that's going to continuously block the myostatin. And in theory, you're going to have enough myostatin blockage that you're going to add muscle and lose fat. I didn't see any results at all from the therapy. My understanding is, you know, a lot of the folks in the cohort saw results similar to me. So I don't know what's going on with that particular cohort, but I will say that I'm very bullish on these sorts of therapies because that is a much cheaper way to do gene therapy in the future. You know, you can put any DNA you want into you know, that sort of plasmid. You could put in Clotho or FGF21 or Humanin or whatever you could potentially encode for, and just have it continuously produced and put out into the bloodstream. And the total cost of something like that would be somewhere in the like $10,000–$20,000 range per therapy, which is a lot more affordable than the, you know, the hTRT gene therapy that I had done, which was 6 figures.
Yeah, expensive stuff. And I'm sure the cost will come down. And to your point, the efficacy will continue to get better. The technology every day is improving.
Yeah.
I was going to ask real quick on the TPE. I mean, it seems like that one out of all these really seems to be extremely promising. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, you're getting something just back in, you know, you're not getting anything outside. It's something that's already in your body. You're just
Yep.
extracting out some of this damage. I mean, those results, those are phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never expected I'd see. Yeah.
Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Johnson, the biohacker who spends $2 million a year, you know, he likes to say he has a Guinness World Record by reversing his epigenetic age by 6 years. I don't know that if that's really a world record. I mean, I've essentially been able to do that just from the TPE alone. Nothing else caused this result. So, Johnny.
Yeah. To that, I'll add, I had TPE. I have not had gene therapy, but looking forward to it. But of many, many therapies I've ever done, the TPE showed the best objective as well as subjective results. And sometime in a later presentation, Jason, I'd be glad to discuss that.
That'd be amazing. And I know we're wrapping up here. And just for viewers as well, although TPE might be more speculative in your minds if it's unfamiliar, just giving blood, that actually is going to remove some of these damaged proteins and all the accumulated junk that you've developed over your life, just getting rid of some of that. And you help people out too. So go give blood if you can as well.
Irina and Mike Conboy, you know them, and I've been discussing with them, but they're planning a study to evaluate the results of plasma donation only.
Oh,
yeah. So not the albumin. So stay tuned.
Sweet. Well, thank you a lot, Paul, and thank you, Johnny. Really appreciate it. Really great job, and thanks for sharing your results, Paul.
Thanks, Jason.
I know,
Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Outstanding, Paul.
definitely.
Thank you, Johnny. Really appreciate it.
And thanks for keeping track, taking all those blood draws each morning.
You bet. Hope to be back on again here sometime soon. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Cheers.